Welcome to the second of our surprise episodes on the Abandoned STI, where that little trick up my sleeve I referred to last episode looks a little something like this. Before you Evo guys get on my case about being a cheater, this isn't actually about cheating. This is more about science and Pete and I wanting to learn a little bit about different turbos on this engine. So if you'll recall in the original build, we have a G30-660 on this stroked EJ207. I think it's stroked to about 2.1 liters. And we felt like it was being held back a little bit in the top end. And you may recall we upgraded the intercooler and did some other changes to it to try to wake things up, but we still feel like it's being held back just a little bit. So when Garrett came out with the G30-660, we thought, that's a really interesting opportunity to make a quick change and see if this gets us a bit more top end. We'll expect it to maybe add a touch more lag, although maybe not, and maybe lose a little bit of mid-range with the hopes that we're going to gain some top end. And this engine was built to rev, so we're hoping we might get that top end and really be able to use those RPM more effectively with this turbo. That's kind of our theory anyway, and we're going to find out by swapping it in there and going back to Toge Tuning and using their mainline dyno again, which kind of explains why we did that checkup on the dyno. I really wanted a baseline for this swap. So obviously, it won't be a bad thing either if I pick up a bit of top end, because we know that Evo is going to rip pretty hard. I also know it's quite a bit lighter than this car, and that's really my biggest concern is I don't want to give Pete any advantages by him showing up with the same power but in a lighter car. So if I pick up a bit of extra power, I'll just use the excuse that my car is heavier and we'll still call it even Stevens. Step one here is to remove our G30-660, which should actually be quite easy since our turbo kit is all V-banded. The turbo is just sitting right up top here on the engine bay, so let's get to work. There you have it, our G25 is out, and it was really very easy to remove thanks to all the V-bands on this setup. So yeah, if you're planning to swap turbos, I think V-band's really hard to beat, isn't it? And we never had any issues with them ever leaking or coming loose or anything like that too, so it seems like a really solid setup. Here we have our G25-660, and here is our G30-660. They have the exact same specs on the compressor side. So what you're looking at here is the turbine side or the exhaust side, and you can see how much larger the turbine wheel is on the G30 versus on the G25. It's actually, I think, 6 mil larger diameter on the inducer and 5 mil larger on the exducer, or the the bottom diameter and top diameter of these blades. And that's obviously going to give us more flow on the exhaust side. I mean, Garrett actually has a really good analogy on their website where they talk about AR sizing, but I think it would also apply just as much to the turbine wheel sizing, and that is, sucking air in through a small straw versus sucking in versus a large straw. With that smaller straw, you're going to reach the limits of the flow and velocity through that much more quickly, and you'll start to get, pressure build up in your mouth, or what is the equivalent of back pressure in an engine. With the bigger one, you're going to have less back pressure, and it'll be much easier to flow through that larger straw. So this should help us with reducing back pressure, which should help the whole efficiency of the motor. We should see some performance gains just from that alone. And we are also going to a larger AR. So this is the 101 AR exhaust housing that we're going to put on the G30, and we had a 0.92 on the G25. So by going to this larger housing, again, that same bigger straw analogy applies. However, we may, because of the larger area in there, have some loss of response or later spool up. So it'll be interesting to see how much spool changes by going to this bigger exhaust side setup versus how much power we gain at the top end. Just getting to drop the G30 in the engine bay here, and I should mention that it's not just replacing the G25 in our engine bay, it also replaces the G25 as the world's most powerful small frame turbo. You can get this G30 not only in the 660 version that we have now, which 660, by the way, means it's like peak horsepower rating. You can also get it in a 770 version and a 900 version. So you can make 900 horsepower out of a small frame turbo now, which is just mind-blowing. So, and of course it comes with all the same goodies that the G25 does. It's their top of the line turbochargers with these very nice stainless exhaust housings that are rated to like, I think 1050 degrees Celsius. And the turbine wheel is also made of a very special alloy. I think they call it MAR-M, M-A-R-M, also rated to 1050 Celsius. And of course the aerodynamics inside is all their latest and greatest stuff, so it's an extremely efficient turbocharger. It is the best performing Garrett that money can buy. So let's drop it in there. Got the turbo in place now, and looking at our old DEI heat shield from the G25 Turbo, it's still in amazingly good shape. Look at this thing. Like, there is almost no discoloration on the inside of it. And this car has been driven hard and seen some action at the racetrack and obviously on the dyno. Really impressed with how durable this is. However, it's a little bit too small for our bigger exhaust housing. So Pete went into his world famous stash and found us another DEI heat shield in the next size up. This is their titanium series shield. And as you can see, it's got like this carbon look weave on the outer layer. It's got double seams all around, and it has a really heavy duty high temp silica internal structure, I guess you'd call it, which traps all that heat in the turbo exhaust side. And that improves the turbo's efficiency and obviously protects the engine bay and the paint and everything else from heat soak. This thing is rated for 1800 Fahrenheit direct heat and 25 radiant heat, 2500 radiant heat. So it'll take all the heat this turbo can possibly generate and still come out looking new if it's any indication how good this one still looks. So they have these nice rivets on here for wiring it on. So I think maybe now is the time for Pete to jump in here and wire this thing up, because he did the last one and it looked like it took a little bit of patience.
So DEI does supply some safety wire, and you can use conventional pliers to twist it on here, but I have these, I don't even know what these are called. They're like a spin set of pliers. So you lock them in place here as such, and now they're locked in, and now what you can do is hold this and then it spins the wire. And what I've failed to have done is cut it to length. So usually you want to cut this to length, but I'm just going to do it this way so I can figure out the length that I need to run to the other side. But as you can see, it gives you this perfect spiral right there. That's plenty. Now what we're going to do is fit this up onto the exhaust housing as such. Then you can kind of just wiggle it around until you find a good spot for it, which is right there. So now I'm going to take my wire, pull it around here, and wrap it around this side and just pull it nice and tight. Okay, and then do the same on the other side, which is a little bit more difficult. But still, this turbo actually has lots of space, so it's not that bad. The Evo, for example, when I was trying to put this on, was a little bit more work. So now that I've got both wires wrapped around, I'm going to come in with my pliers one last time and then spin everything just to tighten it up. Oh, I got myself, Dave.
Oh yeah, how'd you do that?
It's like the Abandoned STI knows it's in trouble.
Oh, look at that, bloody knuckles.
Yep.
There you have it, G30 in its new home. So now it's time to pack up and head to Toge Tuning and get this thing bolted up to their mainline dyno. So we've already got a map back from Mike at Cop Tuning. I sent him some logs from the street, so he's updated that to a very safe G30 baseline map. So we're gonna start an initial pull here. He's just said rev it to 7K in sport mode. We'll send him that log, and the tuning process will go from there. So I think it's maybe time to fire this thing up. All right, we've done a couple of initial pulls just to 7,000 RPM, both in sport and now sport sharp mode, and yep. You're thinking it's looking pretty promising so far, right?
Yeah, you guys aren't down too much horsepower from the old turbo with like an extra 5 psi. So I mean, every PSI should be worth somewhere around 10 horsepower. So I think you guys are going to surpass it quite handily.
Sweet. We're not going to max out the mainline today, though?
Maybe, no.
What were you saying? It's good to 4,500 R?
4,500 horsepower.
Jeez, that's insane. Well, we want to be here when you do max it out, but not today, boys. Not today. Woo, she made some good jam on pump gas, 414, which is a big jump from our old setup. We were at 383 before.
383, yeah.
So that's like 31 wheel horsepower more, so that is significant, but there's also a significant trade-off, isn't there?
Yeah, it looks like roughly around 1,000 RPM difference in terms of boost threshold.
Yeah, so it's spooling up around 54, where before it was around 45.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
So that's a significant trade-off, but Chris was saying that on the track, he doesn't expect we'll drop out of boost, so we should be fine for track use. On the street, I don't know how it's going to feel. I guess we'll find out just by driving it around and see if my right foot says I'm waiting too long or not. But anyway, I love to see the increase in peak power, so I think maybe it's time to throw that VP Octanium in there and really turn it up. Apparently I stand corrected. Mike has kept tuning here on the pump gas, and we are now up to 432, and it's carrying much better, isn't it? It's carrying like another 400 or 500 RPM.
Yeah, like 500 RPM.
Which is nice to see. So even though we are seeing that trade-off with spool happening about 900 RPM later, we are catching some on the back end, and we're up like almost 50 wheel now. So man, it's looking pretty good. I think we are now ready for the VP Octanium, so it's time to turn the boost up. I think he'll turn the boost up a couple PSI. We'll wait and see, but we're going to be at a 102 octane now, so let's get to it. Man, that VP Octanium stuff really works. We made a pile more power there.
That was huge.
Like you were saying, at 7,100 RPM, we made like 80 wheel horsepower?
Yeah, yeah.
And it grew a bit past that even. Went to like 100 wheel at 7,300 or something?
Where the last turbo started to taper off, now you're up 100 wheel horsepower.
100 wheel horsepower, that is insane. And the torque is really climbing too. We're at 375 now at around 6,300 RPM, where before we were more like 320-ish, I think. So
Yeah.
a big jump in torque too. Wow, that kind of blows my mind. I didn't think we were going to get to 480. That's astounding. So, and Mike's not done yet, I don't think. So let's see if he has any more revisions for us here. All right, everyone, our final numbers there were 484 and 380 foot-pounds of torque, which is pretty amazing. And as you can see, we've got tiny Mike McGinnis on the phone here. He's actually man-sized in real life. Thank you, Mike, for your tuning efforts today. What do you think of the results?
Well, it's always nice when a plan comes together and you get what you're hoping for. So what we were hoping for was significantly more top-end power by reducing back pressure and increasing the size and the flow of the turbine wheel as well as the turbine housing. So what that allowed us to do is get a lot more air out of the engine, which in turn allows a lot more cylinder filling on the way in, since there's a lot less exhaust gases left over in the cylinder after a cycle ends. So the result there is we improved the volumetric efficiency of the entire engine system, essentially, by changing the hot side of the turbo. So we know we didn't change the compressor side at all. It's the same cold side on the turbo, just the hot side changed, and huge difference today.
Yeah, it's big numbers. And do you think the jump in power with the VP Octanium in there, it was a bigger jump than we saw previously on the G25? Do you attribute that to the exhaust side change allowing more timing, or what do you attribute that to?
I mostly attribute that to now that we were already making well into the 400s on pump gas, I'm a little bit more conservative in what I do on pump gas. You know, the consistency of the fuel quality on pump gas just isn't super predictable or reliable. And the more power you make, the more that can be a concern. So I'd say I pushed it a little harder on pump gas on the smaller turbine turbo, because we were only making 300 something, but you know, now we're well into the 400s on pump gas, and I figured we'd play it safe, keep that side of the tune nice and safe, and then really crank it up with the Octanium in there and see what this new turbo could do.
So here we have our G25 on the Octanium booster in yellow and our G30 on the Octanium booster in blue. And wow, that's a pretty significant difference, isn't it?
That's huge.
That is a lot of top end we picked up. I mean, from, what's that, say 5,400 RPM to redline, 7,600 RPM, it is big gains.
Yeah, 80 to 100 wheel horsepower.
80 to 100 wheel. But of course, we also have this area here that we can't ignore for people on the street.
Yep.
This sort of like 4,000 to 5,000 range. We did lose like 30 to 40 wheel in there. So there is definitely a trade-off there, but as far as like a track setup goes, it's pretty compelling to make the switch to the G30, isn't it?
Yeah, it really depends on where you're going to be using the car. Like this definitely shows like more of a track setup, whereas down here, if you're trying to have fun with your buddies on the street or that sort of thing, maybe in the Toge, that might be good. But
yeah, it's true. Speaking of Toge, thank you Toge Tuning for letting us use your mainline again. And you've seen every flavor of EJ build over the years. How does this sort of stack up against a similar type of build?
These numbers look really good. I mean, obviously it's a smaller displacement motor, so compared to, we use a lot of 2.5 liters, so we would expect this to be shifted a little bit more to the left, but the numbers display pretty impressively. I'd be curious to see what this turbo would do on a 2.5 liter. I think maybe it would be above this 500.
Yeah, that 500 number is tantalizing, isn't it? We were tempted to do a YOLO tune with Mike, but we decided we didn't want to push our luck, so I think this is a safe number for us to be at. And maybe this is a reason for Pete and I to consider a 2.5 liter build. I know we've been toying with that idea, maybe throwing it in a GC chassis as a 2021 build. So comment below if you'd like to see that happen. And in the meantime, if you live in the GTA and you want to run on the big boy of dynos, give Toge Tuning a call. And thanks again, Mike from Cobb Tuning, for all your work. Really appreciate you giving up your afternoon for us. So thanks everyone. Hope you enjoyed this episode. It is really finally time to get this thing to the racetrack and see how it does against Pete's Protogivo.